Story 1. She talked too much about herself and her experiences and interrupted me when I tried to regain control of the conversation. Story 2. Not mine, but my sister was doing a session over Zoom when the video her therapist was watching off-screen started playing at full volume. Story 3. After a few months of working together, every time I shared something with her, she said, "Okay, so you just trauma dumped on me again," always with a tone of exhaustion. However, she never offered alternative options for sharing techniques, and I was not sure why I was in therapy if I was not allowed to share things without getting negative reactions. Honestly, she helped me a lot at first, but then maybe she got tired of me. Story 4. I live in a very nice neighborhood, which is well known for being an affluent area. After finding out where I lived, my therapist talked for about 15 minutes about how awful the east side of Indianapolis is and how he would not live in my neighborhood because it is too close to the bad part of town. He said things like, "Aren't you afraid living there? That cannot be good for your anxiety. I would be a mess all the time." I corrected him and told him I live in Geist, which is actually quite safe and quiet. He brought it up in our next session as well and mentioned that I should move to help with my anxiety levels, suggesting that living in a small town or a nicer suburb would make me feel safer. He was projecting his insecurities about bad neighborhoods onto me. Story 5. Tried really hard to convince me my father had sexually abused me and I had repressed it. There was no way on earth that was true. Story 6. Missed an appointment twice. It was about an hour and 15-minute bus ride to their office, and it was locked. Then I called them, and they said they forgot we rescheduled. I have never been back to therapy since. Story 7. I had an eating disorder. I told her peanut butter was a safe food, and she said she gained weight when she started eating peanut butter. That confused me a bit. Story 8. Convinced me to do eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, telling me I would be supported through the sessions. Proceeded to get me to dig into my trauma and kept pushing for every detail to try to connect my physical body to this experience. When I did not react emotionally, the session ended. I was told there would be more sessions, but she never contacted me again and avoided my calls. I spent the next 3 months experiencing recurring trauma-related dreams. Thank you for that, Lisa. Story 9. Not me, but my partner. They were asked if they ever had a chance to sleep around in their early 20s. My partner said no and was happily monogamous. The therapist said that essentially, they should break up with me to explore more sexual partners. They were shocked. The therapist would not drop the subject, and my partner had to leave because the therapist would not let go of the idea that my partner needed to sleep around. They went to therapy because they wanted help managing job stress. Personally, I have never had a bad experience. Thank God. Story 10. He showed up in one of those "Are we dating the same guy" Facebook groups, and he did not treat women well. I stopped engaging after that. Story 11. My first appointment with a new therapist had a knock at the door about 15 minutes in. It was the therapist's supervisor. The therapist said she didn't think there was anything they could do for me and was emailing her boss the whole time I was speaking, telling her that I was a danger to myself and needed inpatient care. The therapist would not believe me when I said I wasn't suicidal. I ended up having a panic attack and leaving. The supervisor called me later that day to apologize. After reviewing everything, she said I was right and the therapist overreacted. She said she would set me up with a more experienced therapist at the clinic, but I never returned. Story 12. I told him I started feeling suicidal again, to which he responded, "I don't really think about it or worry when you say that, because you've been suicidal for a while, and you're still here." I almost wanted to write a note and do it just to have his license taken. Story 13. Scheduled an appointment for me on a holiday when the office was not open, then tried to penalize me for no call and no show. Story 14. Sympathized with my coercive and emotionally abusive ex-husband. The relationship reached a point where I could not have sex with him due to past events. She told me to just give in and have sex, saying that by doing so, I would get over it. She did not try to understand the disconnect and discomfort. Simply put out. Story 15. I went through a pretty rough patch a few years back. I got depressed and gained a lot of weight. To get out of it, I started seeing a therapist. I began pulling myself out of the depression. I was doing better and I had dropped a fair amount of my excess weight. I mentioned it to the therapist. I should mention that this therapist was a larger person, possibly bordering on obese. I didn't care, but she was. When I told her I had lost weight, she responded by talking for about 15 minutes about unrealistic body expectations, then asked me if I had ever watched My 600-Pound Life. I said no, and she told me how the people on the show were very heavy and none of them had ever had a heart attack. I realized I was firmly in her problem territory, not mine. I tried to change the subject, but she kept talking about it. COVID-19 shut us down a week or two later, and I was not sorry to be done with her. Story 16. I supported the employer after I won a claim against them, when they were assigned to help me with the issues caused by the employer. Story 17. She did not show up at 5:01 when my appointment was at 5 o'clock. I was waiting in the virtual room for the appointment to start. Every time we met, she would begin by saying I was her last patient for the week and that she could not wait for the work week to be over. I cannot express how badly I was struggling and needed her or anyone competent to help me. She charged me a $100 no-show fee. Story 18. I went to a therapist for the first time. It was fine. For our second appointment, I had to reschedule, and she said something like, "I know making it to your first appointment can be tough." She did not remember meeting me and called me by the wrong name. This was not a good first therapy experience. Story 19. The therapist I was seeing for a devastating miscarriage kept bringing up how I should leave my husband, who was distant and unsupportive. However, I never indicated that I wanted to leave him or end our marriage. After a few visits with this as the topic, I did not return. I am still happily married to my husband, going on 34 years, and I am a proud mother of a 21-year-old son. I am convinced that if I had left my husband on top of a miscarriage, it would have taken years to regain a sense of balance. Story 20. She started talking more about her own problems than mine, like I am paying you to listen to me, not the other way around. Story 21. He told me I should quit taking my bipolar medication and microdose mushrooms instead. This may not be bad advice for someone with depression, but it is terrible and irresponsible advice for someone with bipolar disorder. My psychiatrist was mortified. Story 22. I suggested that I might have a mild form of autism, as I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and they can overlap. She laughed at me and said I do not have it. We had only a few sessions previously. She did not really know me. Who laughs at a person having a really bad emotional time just trying to figure things out? It is supposed to be a safe place, lady. Story 23. Confused me with another patient twice, asking about my husband's infidelity. Do you know something I don't? Story 24. She agreed with me to try a holistic approach to my mental health. I stopped 2 of my 3 mental health medications for 7 months and could not work during that time. I have been back on all of them now for 5 months. I just started job hunting. Yes, I have a better therapist now. Story 25. Brought religion into the mix on her own accord. I am agnostic. It really rubbed me the wrong way because I could tell she was looking at my issues through a religious lens instead of a medical or mental one. Story 26. Trying to pour my heart out and process my feelings, specifically about the dating scene and how I don't connect with a lot of people. She said very offhandedly, "I get what you mean. All these Iranian men want to come all over me." I was honestly so shocked that I just kept on going. Other questionable things included interrupting to complain about a veterinarian and what they did with her animal, interrupting me to talk about candy, and making lewd comments about my sex life. I tried to report her, but the benefits office had no record of her as my therapist. Still very shady. Story 27. Slept with my now ex-husband after he made fun of my name. I filed paperwork for breach of ethics in that situation. Story 28. She kept a single goldfish in a shallow bowl of water. I mentioned that it has negative effects on the fish to be kept like that, but she brushed it off. I could not go back. Story 29. Somehow, I mentioned that I did not ever want to have children. She proceeded to argue with me about how I was wrong and would change my mind. After our session, I immediately went home and ended our professional relationship via email. Anyone who knows me knows that I have a strong desire to never have children. I do not even want to watch them, not even for an hour. Story 30. Two university therapists. The first one I went to after I was sexually assaulted at a party in college. I told him I was very depressed and harming myself because I was a virgin, saving myself for someone I loved, and I felt broken. He told me I should go to Alcoholics Anonymous for being drunk at a party and being responsible for what happened to me. The second one I went to a year later after my best friend, who was in a Doctor of Philosophy program, committed suicide on campus in his dorm. I was heartbroken. I went to therapy because I couldn't sleep. When I said my best friend's name, the therapist showed some excitement in his eyes and told me he was treating the person who found my best friend dead. He told me how he was found, which I believe is illegal and a painful fact to erase from my mind. I have been deeply affected by these experiences, but I have never seen a therapist after all that mistreatment. I am 35 and wish I had spoken up and taken legal action against them. Story 31. Could not stay awake. Her head kept nodding down more and more. Then she would jerk herself awake and go get a cup of coffee. It did not help. Story 32. I had one therapist who kept saying, "Oh, you must be angry with God," when I was trying to be real about my feelings. I am not interested in your religion. Story 33. Said that the problems I had would all be solved if I accepted Christ as my savior instead of being pagan and bisexual. I said that actually a lot of them could be solved if I had $100 more a week, and I could save that by not seeing him. Story 34. I am trained at the college certificate level as a holistic health coach. I am not a therapist and not trained in psychology, only in teaching self-care practices and self-advocacy. I share this to provide perspective on what I am about to write. I wanted to try light exposure therapy for my rejection-sensitive dysphoria and related anxiety issues. She wanted me to practice gratitude by thanking my bath water. Yes, let that one sink in. Story 35. I was a first-time mom with a newborn and started seeing a therapist for possible postpartum depression. My therapist herself was very pregnant and kept asking me questions in a tiny, horrified voice. How much sleep would you say you get in a day? How long do you spend nursing? How much laundry are you doing? Story 36. I was barely 3 months postpartum, so I normally wore sweatpants. I wore real clothes and makeup one day to a session, which might have been my 4th or 5th time with her. She looked at me and said, "Wow, you must not feel depressed anymore if you're putting makeup on again. How exciting. I think we can be done now." I was literally speechless. Story 37. One person cried when I told her about my childhood. After describing my depression to another for 20 minutes, her only response was, "Have you ever had an abortion? That's usually what makes women depressed." It turned out that was a Catholic therapy office. As a teenager, one therapist talked to my mom, who denied everything I said, and the therapist accused me of lying about my situation. After explaining my desire to no longer be on medication to another therapist, he accused me of filling multiple prescriptions with different doctors and pharmacies to sell at a bar where I worked and threatened to check his database for my prescription requests. I told him it would be wiser to check the database before accusing me of such behavior. He got up mid-session and checked, but didn't even apologize for being wrong. So basically, they were all ineffective and I don't go to therapy anymore. Who needs help like that? After the prescription incident, I went home and dumped every single medication and wrote a scathing review. I stayed off medication for 10 years and felt liberated. Story 38. I told her I was so desperate I was considering euthanasia. She replied, "Maybe it's something you should try out," implying she did not see a better future for me. It affected me deeply, and I went into a psychotic panic state afterward. I ended up in jail for days and made several attempts on my life. When confronted, her explanation was, "I was just joking. Naomi, if you are reading this, you are a poor psychologist and an even worse person." Story 39. Quoted Reddit to me. I swear. He gave this big, long spiel about grief and I was like, yeah, I read that on Reddit too. Story 40. I felt like I was manipulating them into validating my bad behavior when really what I needed was someone to tell me to stop. The next one did that. Story 41, we had virtual sessions, and she was clearly doing other things while I was talking. I could hear her mouse clicking all the time, and her eyes were constantly tracking something else. It was not helpful, so I ended the sessions. My new therapist is much better. Story 42. She tried to push her religious beliefs on me. I am an atheist who has tried many different churches in my lifetime and finally realized that it is not for me. My belief system is not religious in any way. I included this in my consultation form when registering to see her. We talked for about an hour. Then she told me my homework was to go to her church because she could tell that I am a very spiritual person and that I am missing God in my life. I never went back. Story 43. Connected my issue to me being a person of color when it was not related. Forced this issue in sessions. Talked over the end of my sentences. Unsubtle yawning when I spoke. When I said I did not think we were the right fit, I was told that patients often try to quit when things get hard in therapy and that it was a sign it was working. Story 44. I worked for a well-known glossy magazine at the time. She called me outside of the session, told me about another client who is a photographer, and asked if I could show my work to their book to try and get them in. Felt like a violation, so I stopped responding to her after that. Fast forward a decade later, I had to fire another therapist when, while I was explaining how I wanted to process the trauma of my cesarean section, she interjected with, "Because you took the easy way out?" Story 45. I started going to him for counseling. A lot of my stress at that time came from being my dad's full-time caregiver, being a full-time mom to 2 kids, and my marriage. One of my biggest complaints about my marriage was that my husband always shushed me, talked over me, and didn't let me talk. Months into it, I decided to do a joint session with my husband. The therapist asked why we were there. Neither of us said a word. I decided to force something out because we only had half an hour. I got halfway through my second sentence when my husband cut me off. I was glad he was participating, but I hadn't finished my thought yet. I let it be, but he rambled on for several minutes, with him and my therapist passing the conversation back and forth to each other like I wasn't there. Then I decided to speak up and try to join the conversation, especially seeing as I never finished my second sentence in the first place. And then my therapist shushed me just like my husband does and told me to let my husband talk just like my husband does. That was it, brother. Story 46. My first therapist kept explaining my own autism to me. The final straw was when he said I had a meltdown during a family vacation because expectations didn't meet reality. In fact, I was experiencing a panic attack. He criticized me for using my mom as an emotional crutch when I went to her for comfort after I had exhausted every single thing I do to calm down and was still feeling the most anxious I ever have. Is it wrong for a child to go to her extremely supportive and loving mother? The third therapist was the charm. My current therapist is absolutely amazing and has helped me much more than the first ever could. Story 47. My therapist told me I should stop looking for a high-paid job, settle for something middling and easy, focus on being a mother first, and support my husband above all else. I felt very proud when I landed that high-paid job. Story 48. Every session felt unproductive, as if I were talking to a friend with little insight rather than a trained professional. I was already feeling that this was not working for me. In the final session, I was venting about something, and she asked me, "Have you seen this one television show?" I had not. She then said, "There is this one episode where something happens, so just do what they did in that episode." I could not believe I was paying this person. I switched immediately after. Story 49. She was an avid anti-vaccination advocate. I found out when I asked if I could use mild sedatives because I was an emotional mess and felt out of control. She was against all medicine, including vaccines and pills. She dedicated an entire session to telling me she did not vaccinate herself or her children and never used any medication, despite having asthma. She was content calling in sick every few weeks, obviously because her health was fragile and she refused medication, calling it poison. This caused my appointments to be frequently rescheduled, prolonging my therapy. Scheduling appointments was already difficult because I did not want my education to be delayed due to therapy. I now have a degree in biomedical sciences. She was a psychiatric nurse, and I believe she betrayed her profession. Needless to say, I asked for another therapist and nurse afterward. Story 50. I only lasted one session with one therapist because she said, "You've only been physically and emotionally abused? The majority of women I see have also been sexually abused. I'm sorry, I don't have enough trauma for you." I did find a much better therapist. Story 51. Reported an old, handled incident to Child Protective Services. Yes, I am a mandated reporter, but it had already been investigated and found to be unfounded. So all that pain and trauma had to be relived again. She told me everything my daughter would tell her. After every appointment, she would email all her notes and feedback, which I was not okay with, and my daughter was not either. So we moved on from her. Story 52. I defended the psychologist he had referred me to see if I was a candidate for ketamine treatment, for encouraging me to commit suicide in a different way than I had planned. The psychologist was absolutely brutal and spent the entire appointment berating me and making medically inaccurate claims. Seriously, the mental health community is full of abusive individuals. It takes a lot for them to lose their license, and they protect each other. They are also really good at picking their victims. Story 53. It is sad because I really liked this therapist. I have even been thinking about asking to come back. But writing this made me mad again. The therapist did not confirm a change of appointment, which I missed. His office tried to double charge me for a late fee, one that he excused due to it being his fault. After I mentioned this, the office deleted all my invoices to create new ones that supported their story. Then my therapist basically said, "I trust what my office says." I showed the emails with direct quotes that the late fee was waived. They gave me an ultimatum: pay the late fee or you will never work with this therapist again. So I left. Story 54. I was speaking about my dating difficulties, and he asked me if I would ever consider dating an overweight older man. He was an overweight older man. Story 55. I had one client who was new to me. During our second appointment, she took off her shoes to get more comfortable. At our third appointment, she was eating while I talked and started choking on her food. I canceled my next appointment. I was already hesitant after the shoe incident because it was unprofessional, but eating during an appointment was too much. The next one, our first and only appointment, was a telehealth visit, and she was working from home. She had to ask me to hold on so she could talk to her child, who was apparently in the room. I was extremely uncomfortable talking to her after that. It is difficult enough to discuss personal history with someone new, but to know it was not even private was unacceptable. Story 56. I was using company credits for external therapy provider sessions. When I resigned with a week's notice, my therapist became upset and told me I should use all the sessions at once, having several hours of therapy in a row. When I explained that was not possible for me, she suggested I could lie to the therapy service provider about my employment status and continue using the service after leaving the company. She was likely desperate to secure payment for the remaining sessions, which was really distasteful. Story 57. 1. You need to be a better Catholic daughter. Excuse me, I literally have an emotionally abusive parent. 2. I am going to level with you. If you view recovery as a percentage, you will never make it past 70% back to normal. 3. Why are you here? You two are perfectly fine together and I see no issues. The same person was also a massive creep. Story 58. Introductory session. Usual questions. I explained I suffered from anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. She immediately asked me if I had experienced ritual satanic abuse. Story 59. When I told her I missed my mother, who had passed 7 years earlier, she told me I should be over that by now. Story 60. I was talking about my ex's mother and my baby's grandmother being brutally mean to me and doing things like pretending I wasn't in a room. She said, "Well, I understand that," and mentioned that it makes sense since we broke up. It's hard to explain, but her tone was totally dismissive, and she made it clear she was basically on my ex's mother's side. I had been really close with my ex's mother and was really hurt by the situation. I totally understand her not wanting to be close anymore, but she was genuinely being cruel. I don't want a therapist to lie and tell me I'm always right, but this one didn't give me even the smallest amount of empathy when I was in pain or help me process things at all. which is the whole point of therapy. Story 61. She knew that I was trying to find another place to live and offered for me to move into their in-law suite, since they usually rent it out to young adults for a few years at a time until they get on their feet. She explained that I could then no longer be her client, but that was okay. The breaking point for me was that she backed out after I had already committed. She said that they were going to lease it to someone else. I was hurt and scared because housing is really hard to find on short notice around here. But I had already given my notice to my current landlord since we had confirmed everything. Then 2 weeks later, I received a phone call from her saying she would like to rent it to me again. I never responded and never returned for more therapy. Story 62. A work colleague recommended this therapist. The therapist began sharing confidential information about my colleague. I was appalled and so taken aback that I could not respond. I terminated the therapy, as I believed nothing I said to her would be kept confidential. Story 63. She made me lift up my shirt, showing my bra and belly because she thought critiquing my body this way would help my self-esteem as a 16-year-old. Story 64. I am currently not able to eat much due to complications from my transplant 18 months ago, and I need a few nutritional supplements every day. I have a 4-year-old daughter who understands why I am not able to eat properly at the moment. If I tell her how much I like something that I am currently not able to tolerate, she gets excited about eating it together when I am able to. My daughter knows that I cannot eat properly because I am ill, and she knows that I miss eating and cannot wait to enjoy food again. She has a good appetite and will eat almost anything put in front of her. My therapist is fully aware of all this. She told me that I might give my little girl an eating disorder. It broke my heart to think that my physical health could harm my daughter. Story 65. He told me the reason my marriage was failing was me. Nothing my narcissistic ex-husband did was wrong. We had only been married 6 months. Story 66. I told this man previously about some issues I have with girls and women being seen as less than in the culture I came from. A few sessions later, he was cheerfully telling me about how great his men's groups are and how he wishes he could only work with them. Also, one time he logged on around 3 in the afternoon and started eating a low-fat dairy yogurt on screen. Story 67. After 6 visits, the staff continued to call my deceased husband by the wrong name. Then they told me to go home, write my problems down on a piece of paper, and burn it to feel better. I am not a teenage girl. I do not subscribe to the 21 protocol, and I was not having mere problems. I had a complete break from reality and was seeking follow-up care. I do not seriously believe that writing things down on paper and burning it will help. I walked out and never returned. Story 68. He was too focused on my love life. I was dealing with complicated grief from my mother dying, and he kept asking if I was putting myself out there to find a new partner. No, I am crying in bed with ice cream. Can we talk about that instead? Story 69. He stalked me and lied to get me to come to his office for an emergency, but he was experiencing a mental health crisis. He wanted me to lie to his girlfriend, claiming I was his friend, not his client, and to tell her she should stay with him. The girlfriend told me he had written manipulative fake suicide notes in crayon and left them where her children could see. I ended the relationship, but he kept calling until my husband threatened him. He was later arrested for stalking other patients as well. Story 70. Brought her dying elderly dog to her office and saw patients, including me, with the dog in the room. She told me she had to be with her dog when it passed away, so it could not be left alone. I spent the whole session watching the dog breathe and hoping it would make it. Story 71. Called me a spoiled little princess because I was depressed even though I did not have any major trauma or a horrible life. I was about 15 and had already attempted suicide at that point. Story 72. I went to a female therapist and explained I had stage 4 breast cancer. Her information online said she had experience with people with cancer. I saw her regularly, and one day I was talking about being worried about Christmas and my family. In mid-sentence with, "I'm worried that," I paused to gather my thoughts, and she said, "That this will be your last Christmas?" That was not at all what I was going to say, and I told her that. I ended the sessions and explained exactly why. Still here 7 years later, I really should send her a Christmas card. Story 73. Told me that I was wrong for not wanting my mother-in-law to go in my bedroom. Told me that she sleeps in her own son's bed when she visits him, and my in-laws should be able to sleep in my bed. I quote, "Isn't that what everybody does?" Said condescendingly. We were going to her to address my mother-in-law not respecting boundaries. Specifically, I didn't want her in my room, touching or moving my stuff or doing my laundry. I saw red. I flipped out on her. I didn't care. It was after months of her agreeing with every single thing my husband said. Every time. She just didn't like me from day one. She would make snide comments and give me looks when literally siding with him. She made things worse in my marriage, not better. When I finally flipped, she told me, "She's the best there is," in her field with a nasty smirk on her face. Forget that woman. She was insane. It still makes my blood boil, and that was over 7 years ago. We found an actual helpful therapist about 2.5 years ago. He has helped so much. He's the complete opposite of the woman I described above. Story 74. The psychiatrist told me I was good looking and not to worry about finances because I would be just fine. He told me to just go to the bank. I am not fancy or good looking. This was a follow-up appointment after a suicide attempt where I was discussing my stressors. Story 75. My ex's behavior, acting like an abusive man on stimulants due to his diet pills, was something I needed to learn to tolerate. Story 76. One told me I dissociate. Then she said that meant I had multiple personalities. That confused me for 10 years. Another time, I was seeing a professional about my child for the first time. She dismissed my child and kept questioning me about my past because I mentioned past trauma in my paperwork. This appointment was for my child, who needed help adjusting to a new school, but she ignored those needs completely. I never went back to her but found another professional for my child. Story 77. Not a therapist, but a guidance counselor. He looked down at my Hispanic last name, gave me a confused look when he looked up at me, said my last name out loud, and then asked if I was in the country legally. I was scheduled to see him again, but I did not. I wish I had filed a complaint. Story 78. My husband had physically assaulted me, and I had him arrested. I said I felt guilty for having my son in that environment. He said I should feel guilty. Story 79. She had no understanding of neurodivergence and never encouraged me to get tested, despite my exhibiting multiple symptoms that often prevented me from completing homework. She made me feel guilty for not being able to do the homework. She also made me feel guilty and broken for needing medication and for not being able to do chores without listening to a podcast or another source of distraction and dopamine. I did not fire her. I simply stopped booking appointments a few months ago. A few weeks ago, she sent me a follow request on Instagram. Story 80. Someone used slurs about me being lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender by name to someone else, only for that person to contact me to tell me about it. Story 81. After a traumatic divorce and move across the country, I decided to find a therapist to continue my progress. She came highly recommended. I have handled most problems in life relatively well, but this divorce and move left me feeling like I no longer had control over my emotions. I needed help figuring out what to focus on to take charge again and move past the trauma that had affected me for the previous year. She was very dismissive, saying, "Well, I see life as chapters, and that chapter is just over now." While I understand that, I did not need to pay $250 to be told to get over it. Story 82. Went over the wrong client's medication history, and when I said that is not my medication, she asked, "You are first name last name, right?" I said, "No, I am not." So not only did she not know who I was, I had been seeing her every 6 weeks for quite some time, but she gave me another client's medication history and name. This is not very compliant with the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Story 83. She pushed her religious and political views on me, which were wildly different from mine and made me question her morals, if not her professionalism. Story 84. She laughed at me. I told her a memory about an ex, one I was struggling to get over, that meant something to me. She sarcastically said, "Wow, that is romantic," and laughed. I did not care if she did not think it was romantic. It was to me, and the way she responded was horrible. There was absolutely no mistaking the sarcasm in her voice. I left her office feeling worse than when I came in, and it only got worse from there. So I told her I was going to find someone who cared. Story 85. He spent the entire session telling me about all of his problems, and then finished by saying, "You are such a good listener." Needless to say, that was the first and last time. Story 86. I was an 18-year-old who had started self-harming. I felt safe enough to tell my therapist, and she asked to see the injuries, then said, "Oh, that's not that bad." This sent me into a crippling and incredibly unsafe dependency for over 5 years. In the sessions thereafter, she continued saying, "We do what we do because we know it works," and never tried to help me find alternatives. Needless to say, I switched therapists after 6 months of that. I finally hit 2 years clean in February, but those words have stuck with me ever since. Story 87. I was in therapy mainly for childhood trauma. After I went no contact, my abusive mother contacted my therapist. I was taken aback during a couple of sessions when my therapist suddenly pushed for reconciliation until he told me he was going to take her on as a client too. He ended up walking it back in the same session, but the damage was done. I was a devastated young adult and didn't see it coming at all. Looking back, especially after working with 2 more therapists, I see he was not good at maintaining professional boundaries in other ways as well. Probably worked out for the best. Story 88. First session back with my therapist after a visit to the psychiatric ward. Therapist: I am surprised. I was not expecting anything like that from you. Me: I told you I was suicidal. Therapist: I thought that was just a figure of speech. Story 89. Strike 1. She told me I was autistic within the first 10 minutes of meeting me. No test or proper evaluation. Her only explanation was, "I just know these things and you look autistic." Strike 2. When I talked about my anxiety and how I want to handle it at work, she said, "Some people aren't meant to do anything good with their life. They just need to accept they're not special and settle for mediocrity." Strike 3. She went on a 20-minute rant about how awful furries are, the kinds of nasty things they do, and why people should be discouraged from being one. I am not a furry. We were not even talking about furries or anything related. I had seen her because my job at the time used her as one of the company-appointed therapists, and insurance would cover the majority of the cost if I used the program. After 2 sessions and 3 strikes, I stopped seeing her. Story 90. Offered hypnosis on the initial intake visit. I quickly left the office after 15 minutes of conversation. He was over 40 and I was 19. He kept offering to hypnotize me to dig deep, and he had the audacity to try to bill me the full amount for the session. The advertised rate for the initial visit was much lower. I fought the charge in small claims court and won. I trusted my gut and I was right. He is no longer practicing. Story 91. Wow. This is a great forum to read on the days when you are being hard on yourself. Story 92. I had an amazing therapist. I really liked him. I still think he is a great person. I ended therapy because he lost himself in one of our sessions, and I felt like he was interrogating me. He was triggered. I did not want more sessions after that because I would need more sessions to try to restore the trust between us. I took a pause in therapy after that. I have another great therapist now. Story 93. I was talking about how much I struggled to gain weight. I have literally been under 100 pounds for my entire life and have an eating disorder. He told me I should not gain weight because he thought I looked great and he wished his wife was like me. I responded that I am clinically underweight and unhealthy, and he told me it did not matter because he thought I looked good. He did not understand that my eating disorder does not have anything to do with my body image. I am autistic, do not like eating food, wish I liked eating food, and I just want to be healthy. I never went back. That was my first visit with him too. Story 94. I have a few experiences to share. The first time I tried therapy was with someone I now realize was a recent graduate. I was seeking help for my very debilitating obsessive-compulsive disorder symptoms. She tried to work with me to logically see that I shouldn't need to do a task multiple times. I now know that's not how obsessive-compulsive disorder works. The second time was with a couples therapist my abusive partner booked for us to see. He entirely controlled the narrative, and I was already being emotionally abused and gaslit to the point I was considering checking myself into the hospital because I felt clearly insane and couldn't trust my own brain. This therapist just gave me homework on how to be a better partner and didn't pick up on any of the emotional abuse or gaslighting. He dumped me shortly after that, after 5 years together, because I was no longer the fun person he initially dated and made him feel uncomfortable for the times he initiated sex and I wasn't into it. The third time was when I was seeing a university psychologist for trauma related to sexual harassment and stalking from a colleague. He would often forget my name. He was clearly very overworked and did help me realize the behaviors of someone else weren't my fault or responsibility, but I couldn't feel connected or entirely safe with someone who didn't even care to check their notes for my name. I also saw an assigned psychologist as part of a dietetics program I was on to do controlled elimination and identification of migraine food triggers. He was a real finance professional, and before an appointment once, I saw him try to 65-point reverse park his oversized truck and realized we had different values. My most recent and current therapists have been nothing short of amazing. I hope they never retire. I feel so safe and am on a visible healing journey with them. So there is good news at the end at least. Story 95. She told me that in dating, looks do not matter and a morbidly obese woman with severe facial damage could get more attention from men than Margot Robbie if the former had a nice personality. This was after a year of truly terrible dating advice and my having to explain really basic things to her. She was shocked to learn, for example, that some men are on dating apps just for sex. Story 96. I am sitting there as a poor teenage mother, and she is venting about wealthy people issues, as if I could relate to her. Story 97. She told me how I should try this thing called earthing and talked about the expensive earthing mat she got that sits under her desk and cleans her electrons or some pseudoscience nonsense. I do miss her, and she did help me, but she did that and complained about her boyfriend all the time. Story 98. I was told not to use bad language or curse words. I was drowning emotionally and trying to express myself. I did not need that extra judgment. Story 99. I am very high risk and have followed information about coronavirus disease closely for the entire pandemic because I cannot risk getting infected even once. We had a number of appointments, but eventually she had to cancel some because she became ill. This was understandable and acceptable. However, when she returned after being sick for weeks, she asked me what the media would need to say to get me to stop wearing a mask in public. I terminated her services via email that same night. Story 100. I did not fire them. It was me and my sibling when we were younger, and we complained to our mother about the woman who kept talking about religion and acting shocked at some of the things we said to her. She was not a professional older woman. Story 101. I was newly diagnosed with diabetes at age 12. Scared, I almost died. I had a hard time adjusting, and the therapist told me to get over it. This traumatized me, and I never opened up. Took a long time for anyone to actually reach me. There were other things going on, and I had just begun to trust her. Story 102. My daughter's therapist told her it was okay for her to vape if she stopped cutting. My daughter almost killed herself because of this woman's stupidity. Story 103. She never went deep. She never challenged me or asked about my life, my childhood, or my future goals. We literally only talked about the weather. Story 104.1. Opened with discussing their stance as a devoted Christian and how that influences their style of treatment. I felt this was a biased introduction that should have been disclosed on their website instead of reserved for a paid session. They would not stop trying to blame my father for my issues. It did not matter what I said and could have caused real strain between my father and me if I had pursued that. Story 105. Was dismissive of all my concerns, acted bored, and actually fell asleep during both sessions I had with him. I cursed at him and never went back. Story 106. This will probably get buried, but I went to a therapist in high school when I was suffering from severe depression. She only asked me to talk about my mom. Whenever I brought up something about someone else, she would steer the conversation back to my mom. She told me I was being abused by her. She bought me a painting that she said reminded her of me and my mom. It was a little girl and a woman standing in a storm of raining knives. I had never gone to therapy before, so I didn't know anything was off. She was the professional, so I trusted her judgment and opinions. My mom forbade me from ever seeing her again one day without another word on the subject. It made me believe my therapist even more that my mom was the bad person. My therapist reached out to me in secret and said she would see me for free and in secret. I got a weird vibe after my first free session. She just wanted any and all negative information on my mom. I was self-harming at the time, and she asked if she could take photos. I finally realized she was crossing boundaries. I never saw her again after that. It turns out she was a go-to professional witness for family court trials in my small town, and she hated my mom, who was a family attorney. I guess during a trial, the therapist got on the stand and said that my mom did insert whatever bad thing I told her about to her own child, so how could she argue for custody of someone else's child? Like I said, I'm from a small town where everyone knows everyone, and that woman was publicly speaking about things I had told her in confidence. Every bad thing I could think of to tell her about my mom, because she asked under the guise of healing me. That's why my mom took me out of therapy with her. She has still never told me why. I think it was to protect me and not make me feel bad. She doesn't know that I know. I still feel horrible about it. Story 107. She did not show up for the scheduled appointment. She did not call me or provide any notice. I called and told her that I was sorry but did not want to continue working with her anymore. Story 108. Made excuses for my abusive mother while I was trying to talk through the resentment I felt for her as an adult. Story 109. I was frantically applying to jobs and getting rejected a lot because I didn't have enough employment experience. This was when I was new to the workforce, less than a year, but I had been lowballed and kept on the bench. I was determined to find a better job and start therapy now that I was finally earning. I chose a therapist with the least work experience to give her a chance, 2 years. I chose a person of color because I am a person of color. I chose an atheistic approach to therapy because I am an atheist. In our first session, we went over my issues with my parents, siblings, work, friends, and relationship. She gave me some breathing exercises to help me calm down. I told her I was almost estranged from my parents ever since I got my job. In the second session, some of her first words were, "So, I remember you mentioned that you had a good relationship with your parents, right?" I gave up on her then and there. She proved me wrong for hiring someone with less experience and also showed that she couldn't even keep the basics of her note-taking straight. Story 110. Older therapist but was covered by my insurance and worked out of her home. We were not connecting, and during our last session, she passed gas. That was the last straw. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.